Don't let rampant politics and clusterfuckery ruin all your projects and your sanity. Smooth ugly penny lines and make it all make sense. Get experience by osmosis here on Corporate Underpants.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Corporate Underpants. This is a two-parter. You're going to listen to Adam Staffa, a dear friend of mine, an expert in the world of digital products for higher ed and other non-tech first organizations. I split this into two parts because it's a long conversation. It's a great one. In the first part, Adam is going to talk all about the differences in working on digital projects with non-digital organizations with lots of examples from higher ed. So we're going to hear about the specific tornadoes and problems and clusterfuckery that can happen in those kinds of projects. In the second part, which I'll post as a second episode, we're going to hear all about how Adam started to solve the problem by doing a follow-on project using early stage alignment to do the tornado management that I like to talk so much about. And as you'll see, bring in a project under time and under budget. Let's get going. Okay, here we are. It is season 1, episode 4. I am so overly excited about this because I have loved my guest so far. And I even especially super duper love my guest today, who is Adam Staffa, because Adam is a dear friend of mine and colleague. We knew each other before we knew each other, apparently, which we'll hear about today. And as Corporate Underpants is all about the things that get in the way of us launching great products that have nothing to do with our processes, because we can be great product managers, we can be awesome UX designers, we can be amazing UX researchers, we can be amazing anything, any kind of leader, any kind of member of a staff of somebody who's trying to create and launch anything. And it doesn't matter how good we are at our jobs, because politics, personalities, process messes all can get in the way and cause the equivalent of visible panty lines ruining a great outfit in your user experience. Maybe there are different tabs on an interface because there are different teams who own those tabs versus them making sense on the same UI. For example, when Expedia launched, it had different tabs for flights and hotels, not necessarily because that's the right way to book a trip, but because those were different P&L or profit and loss centers. So they equal different tabs. I think we still do that today, so many years later. And I want to explore that because as we get more senior in any kind of product role, we have to stop using the old refrain of, I'm just staying out of politics, which, by the way, we're probably having to use universally and globally here in the United States, too. You can't say that anymore, because if we're working on the building that is our product like a building site, we always use the house analogy. If we're out there in the world and we're building a house and we're on the place where the house is getting built and we're optimizing all the processes, how the nails are put in, when the contractors arrive, all of that stuff, that's all the double diamond stuff related to product. That's great. We're focused there. We get better and better. But I'm interested in what happens if a tornado comes through. If a tornado comes through a building site, it doesn't matter how great all the people on the team are. It doesn't matter how great the tools and supplies are, how perfect the plan. Everything gets destroyed by tornadoes. To me, tornadoes come from politics, huge upheavals in the environment, in the market, or even externally in the market, which my friend Katie calls earthquakes. I think that's genius. I think we ignore those giant forces that can impact our products because we feel like we can't control them. And my argument is, yes, we can. We just have to understand better that above, from where the weather comes from, or below, where earthquakes come from, the picture looks very different. And the forces that are at work that cause these tornadoes to happen, we actually can impact, even though we're not on the senior level teams, even though we're not on the executive teams. And the way we can do that really well is by understanding how to manage up. And one great way to manage up is not to manage, but to align. Alignment is becoming a bigger and bigger topic in our field these days. The wonderful book by Bruce and Melissa, Aligned, came out, and I highly recommend it, even though at first I wanted to stab myself in the gut because I felt like they wrote my book. They didn't. They wrote their book. They've started the conversation. There is new stuff coming out from the design sprint guys about what I would call early alignment. They call a foundation sprint. And meanwhile, for the last 15 years, I've been working on alignment stuff too, after diving so deep into data first personas, which I wrote books about and then never again did, because I realized there's a bigger problem than data in most organizations. And that bigger problem comes from and is the misalignment of the people who are making the decisions. And even though that alignment has to be done around usually what we would call assumptions, which is a dirty word in our industry, which we have to reconsider, alignment is so critical for all the success of everything we do, data or otherwise, that if we don't do it first, we encounter tornadoes and earthquakes. Now, the reason I'm diving into this so much is for the past few episodes, I've talked about the problem, corporate underpants, and I've had people on talking about these stories of what happens when crazy shit happens to projects and has nothing to do with process or people or whatever, or the idea. Today, we're doing that also in a special way. There is a two-part whammo jammo excellence to this episode today, and it might go in a little longer than usual. Whammo jammo excellent is that it's Adam. And Adam is a goddamn delight, as my friend Julie would say. And Adam is also really interesting because he is a really senior web strategist, which he'll define for us. But he's a web strategist who does digital projects in non digital organizations. Subtle difference, wacky differences when it comes to managing those projects, which we'll talk about. That's whammy number one is the perspective you get by the same picture, just slightly off to the left of what you're used to. You get new insights by seeing it from a different perspective. Whammy number two is we're going to start talking about the solution, which is executive alignment in 5 conversations, alignment personas, and these are all related to my Align Before Design book that I'm working on and some of the coaching that I do. And don't worry, this isn't a giant sales pitch because most of this process I'm giving away. And I just want people to start to have this as a tool in their senior product person toolbox. So that's what's going on and why I'm excitedly talking to you so much more than usual before we get on with things. And one other thought from the week that I wanted to share with you all that I try to share one thought. I am still talking to people who I've known for years and years who are just now realizing how bad the job market is. And I just want to tell you, it is bad and it is not jobs in product, jobs in UX, jobs in research are way harder to get right now than they were 2 years ago. I've been in the middle of all this because I help with this giant community volunteer free network called Never Search Alone, which I highly recommend to all of you. But if you are just now thinking about getting on the job market or leaving or just now starting to look, it is not you. There are ways to get jobs out there. They are different than what's worked before. And I just don't want you to feel like suddenly you've been left behind because you are personally inept. It is not true. And we're going to talk about that some more. And send in your comments. Let us know how you're doing. Let us know where you're joining from. And now, with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce my dear friend, salt and pepper bearded, excellent glasses, who happens to be less than a mile away from me sitting in his own home right now. Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Staffa. Adam, welcome. How are
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you. I'm
you?
doing good. Thank
First
you.
of all, Adam, so we know each other for a couple reasons. I don't even know. We met in person a few years ago when you were dealing with a corporate underpants situation in one of your former jobs. When we had
Mhm.
beer with our friend Andy Fitzgerald. And before that, you had actually known about some of my work because we're both friends with Andy.
Yeah. Yeah. I had brought Andy onto a project to help me with a sticky project that I was thrown into. And by the time we were done, he had mentioned a workshop he had done with you that might have helped me on this project it's too late to do it at this point, but he said, going forward, you might want to look into this, and directed me to this alignment work you've done with him. And I read up on that. And then I decided I'm going to try this on my next big project.
Which is so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so Adam, you tell us about your work and your specialty. You are a web strategist and you specialize non-tech organizations, which is my little word for it. Other people call them other things. But tell us a little bit about your job history. Tell us about what it is, how you became a web strategist and what that means to you.
Yeah, I primarily work in higher ed, government, and healthcare. Those are like my 3 buckets of specialties because I like to do work that serves the public, that helps people, and it's the space I enjoy working in. I got there because I was working in corporate media, And every time I was doing work, I was wondering, why am I doing this? Why am I making this video? Who's this for? What are we trying to achieve? And I realized I wanted to do work where I understood why I was doing the work, what the purpose was. And so I shifted into nonprofit and then somehow got into web strategy, I think, because it's the bigger picture to me. So I started off making a video, then doing photography, then doing some marketing, but then the web brought it all together and said, what are we doing with all these videos, all this content? Where's it going? Who's it for?
So
That's
web
kind of,
strategy comes back to who is this for and what are we trying to say and what are we doing for
yeah,
big web projects, which,
yeah,
I mean, yeah, we
yeah,
should have that.
yeah.
So I really love this history of yours because so as a consultant, I've done some pro bono work over the years for nonprofits. Sometimes that's been great, but I'm just never going to forget it's this post-trauma response to having done 1 or 2 projects where I just could not do my work in a nonprofit organization. I felt like I was losing my mind, even though I was coming
Right,
in and I was coming in as this the way you are enter an organization really helps. Oh, this great expert is coming in to help us with our website, et cetera. And then I just hit this brick wall and we're going to talk about that. And everybody who's listening, this is really important because you're going to see if you work in a digital organization or any kind of technical organization, this is so similar, but so different. So let's talk about the differences. Okay. So when you are in higher ed, tell me about, let's start with stakeholders. What are the stakeholders in higher ed?
so
You
I
know,
was
like a website for a university, right? Or a community
right.
college, or
Yeah,
even
community college. Yep, great example. And I want to be clear that whatever these differences are that I'm going to say, they're not necessarily negative, right?
no.
Like they're just differences, right? And so, yeah, you have many more stakeholders because because the governance is different. There's shared governance of the website,
Okay, we're gonna have
right?
to stop for a second.
Yeah.
I asked you about stakeholders. You just said the word governance. And when
Mhm.
we first talked, I was like, what the fuck is governance? Because I see that word thrown around a lot. I never really have to, I don't do a lot of like giant websites, and maybe that's a thing. Please tell us what governance is.
Yeah. So at least in higher ed and governance is who has a say in what aspects of the site and who gets to make the content, post it. It's usually not somebody who's trained as a web professional or comms expert. It's oftentimes just someone who works in a certain department has oversight of the content or has permissions to publish information to the website. There is a big push now in those spaces to create like official governance, documented, published governance. But sometimes it's just ad hoc and unsaid, unspoken. So
Go
there's a
ahead.
lot of people touching these sites and having input and discussions around them. There's committees all over these organizations that all have different goals that touch these products and they're all working sometimes in alignment and oftentimes not, and so that is one of the differences from like a tech company where everything seems like it's moving in sync and there is a leader who's just defined the goals and the products and everyone's just moving in that direction. That is not always the case, and partly because these websites and big organizations have many purposes and many audiences.
Just for the analogy. So I'm thinking now
Yeah.
of my dear friend Julie, who is a high level communications person at Boeing, a job that seems way too challenging for me to even think about. Her communications department, they're the only ones who I assume physically can change the website. Somebody in the mechanical engineering department of a big company can't just go in and change what the content is on their website. This is more than that, right? This is I had like a racy chart.
Yeah. Because so historically, like a lot of these websites for government and higher ed were developed organically because everyone had to have a website. So they just started to build them and in the IT department built it and just started letting people post things just so they get their information out there.
Yep.
The industry is still dealing with the outcome of that and still trying to like wrangle in things and hone in on, okay, how do we do this more in a modern way to ensure consistency and proper structure?
Albert, who's a friend of Mine in the podcast governance is generally an oversight committee, hopefully comprised of experts or someone with a stake in decisions. Absolutely. But interestingly, that sounds way more organized than it sounds like they actually are.
Yeah.
There's not even a list somewhere in some cases, right?
Yeah. And again, it's coming around. A lot of organizations are getting better at it and documenting it and being more structured on it, but it is definitely not the same approach that you would have at a tech company where someone's job is hired to do that specific work. It's in their job description. Yeah, it's different in higher ed, I think,
So in higher
in my
ed, I'm building
experience.
a picture of Acme College, right? And Acme College has a bunch of department heads and deans. And then they have a bunch of departments, each of which has their own heads of those departments, right?
Right.
And all of them, I'm imagining, would consider themselves having their own website.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
and
Exactly. Right.
being
You
in,
call each section, this is our site. It could be just another subfolder on the site, but this is our site. And so it's discussing, what does that mean? What is a site? What is a section? Who owns it? Who manages it? Who contributes to it? So that's governance. And that probably happens in a lot of other big sprawling organizations that are not higher ed, but I think it's a little messier in higher ed at times.
so that's one
And
set of stakeholders is this
yeah,
sort of blurry collection of powerful, entitled governance people who may or may not be paying enough attention or may not have their own idea of what their website is or should be or how it fits in. But that's
right.
only one set of stakeholders for you. Who else?
Um,
Tell us who else.
you have the executive team, right? You have the marketing teams. You have all these teams that have different goals. And that's the other thing that makes it really somewhat unique, is that there's so many different goals that these organizations have and so many audiences that they're trying to appeal to. Like the foundation at the school is trying to get donations from non-students or from students, but either way from other people. And that's a big goal of a lot of these universities or nonprofits and higher ed. You have their audiences are everyone. There's the community that just comes to community events. There's prospective students. There's alumni. There's corporations that want to participate in helping build programs. They have so many audiences that they are trying to connect with for so many purposes. And so they don't have this one singular goal of sell a widget, sell a
Right. And it's
service.
especially like community colleges or organizations that aren't like a private university that's just going after a subset of
Right.
students.
Right.
As you said when we talked in advance, there's no choice. It is everyone.
Yeah. And you don't get to say we're targeting specifically this segment of the population. That's what we're going to prioritize. It's hard to do that. You can't, you shouldn't. You're a community college or you're supposed to be open to everyone.
Is it an internal team? Do they usually hire external teams? How does this actually get done?
It depends on the organization. Some organizations are building up bigger internal teams. Like some universities are actually starting to hire UX designers, which that's new. Like that wasn't like even 5 years ago, you wouldn't really see UX in a title at the university. So they're building teams that are more structured around common like product and UX teams. But historically, there'd be one person who managed the website and would just take requests. People would just say, I want to add this. Okay, I'll do that. And it was just very transactional. And then if there was a big project, they would call in an agency and the agency would try to do the work and it would get done, but there would be all these roadblocks because that governance issue was not resolved or internally, they had not figured out a lot of their politics or
There's one internal person taking requests and just adding them because they can't say no. That's barnacle-based design, right? That's you
yeah,
just keep adding stuff and you never look at the bigger picture because, of course, one person in a big higher ed institution doesn't have the power to look at everything. And
right.
then, on the other hand, if you bring in an agency, the people who bring in the agency are tasked with taking in RFPs and deciding. But then the agency must be thrust on everybody else who wasn't
Right.
part of deciding on them and may bristle or you never know, right?
Yeah, there's often a lot of kind of resistance to like an outside agency coming in and saying, this is what you're going to do and this is how you're going to do it. And people are like, wait, no, I've always done it this way, or that doesn't meet my goal. Who did you talk to? Why did you make this decision? And so it creates a lot of confusion and some conflict at times. You don't do some alignment work and governance work ahead of time.
The university website, from a tech perspective, isn't all that complicated.
Yeah, you're not reinventing the wheel when you're doing a university or a government website. You shouldn't be. You want to create it to be very accessible to a wider population. And you generally, in my opinion, you always want to be like one step behind in terms of the technology
One
because
step behind?
what one step behind, this could be controversial. I'm just throwing this out, but it might be good to be there because you need it to be accessible to everybody. A senior citizen may not be as tech savvy, maybe they are, but generally speaking, people who are not as tech savvy to people who are extremely tech savvy, you need it to be accessible to everyone and equitable access to the product, to the service. And in higher ed, the site isn't the product. The product is the learning and the education. That's where you can really be innovative, but you're just getting them the information, getting them into the pipeline. And so you don't need to necessarily be razzle dazzle technology.
But you have people who wanna razzle dazzle with, like, their own department. They wanna show off. They wanna not just get students, but also achieve other reputational things.
And there's a way to do that creatively and without reinventing the wheel of technology, right? Work
Okay,
within
so
the confines of, yeah.
that's an interesting difference too, because so many of us in tech organizations, a huge part of the challenge that we face is that whatever the latest thing is,
Yep.
everybody has to have AI now in their websites. And by the way, no humans working there, but that's another
Right.
story. But in higher ed, it's not necessary. It doesn't necessarily make sense to do that because you might even just technically, maybe they're old cell phones. Maybe they're accessing on a computer at a library that hasn't been
Right.
updated in a few years.
Yeah.
That being on the bloody edge of tech is actually perhaps nominally not a goal.
One user that we interviewed at one point, they were not just enrolling, but going to school on their phone in their car. They
Oh
were in
god.
that kind of a situation. So having the latest, greatest tech, they're not going to be able to then access your systems. And to add to that, a lot of the systems that you're working with on a college website, they're state systems. And a lot of times those are like legacy systems that you have to like work within the confines.
Okay,
If
so
you're
there's an
using,
even
if you're doing
bigger.
like API calls from them and there's a lot of privacy restrictions. So you got to be careful what tech you integrate into these ecosystems. And so that's another consideration that's different from higher ed to like for-profit tech is that there are a lot of regulations and policies in place that put some constraints on you, which are good. Oftentimes they're the guardrails that we need in society. There's accreditation requirements. So there's all these things on top of what you would typically have. And there's rules in every industry, but there's a lot more policy, which are, again, designed to make sure it's equitable, accessible. Like you have to meet high level accessibility requirements. It's law, federal law, right? And so you can't always be on the cutting edge of technology and do that easily.
And then it just made me think, like, for, like, state universities, you then have to bubble up to the whole sort of system of the state so that it makes
Mhm.
sense in terms of the branding and navigation and because you may be getting there from a government arm of a website.
Yep.
Okay, so a tech isn't necessarily the place where there should be the most complexity, but where there is insane complexity is politics and also, I assume, information.
Politics, information. You have to think about it too. In higher ed, the pipeline is years, right? So they're coming to your site for years to finish the pipeline, to get through the funnel, right? If I'm going to a transactional site like a Amazon, I go today to buy a new set of dishes, which I actually need. That happens in an hour or 10 minutes even. On my phone, boom, took care of the transaction. It's done. I'm not going back and forth for years to make that decision. Maybe I am, but that would be in higher ed. You start your exploration for the product in your sophomore, maybe junior year. You start to look at the schools. It's 2 years before you go through the whole process. And then it's many years, 2 to 4, 6 months to 4 years till you finish using going through the process till you graduate. And you're constantly going to that same site.
If you graduate, you then become the domain of people at the university who want you to donate
You
or
are in this
partner
pipeline forever.
forever.
Yeah.
Okay, so the place, interestingly, I think, and you and I both are friends with Andy Fitzgerald, who's a really big thinker in the world of taxonomy and content strategy and stuff that it's really hard for me to even fully understand, but the giant ecosystems of content that these people have. And we in our fields, that's relatively new thinking, like really advanced thinking on content. So that is a place where you have to get them up to speed probably, right?
When I first got into higher ed, I was used to doing audits of a site and downloading all the pages and seeing what they have and scanning the site. Thousands and like tens of thousands of pages and documents, tens of thousands. The breadth of content that you are working within is enormous. It's
And people are
incredible.
very protective of it, right? Some of it's
Yep.
research findings, some of it's data,
Yes.
some of it's,
Yeah.
individual professors' pages, some of it's university.
Yeah. And some of it's required to be there, even if the user doesn't want it and the organization doesn't think it helps meet business goals, it has to be there. It's required to be on the site in a certain place in a certain way. Accreditors say you have to have this data presented at all times and updated every quarter or whatever.
And
So
I imagine it's pretty easy for people to get to a point where they're nodding their head. Yeah, there's a fuck ton of content here. I would also imagine it's very different to get them up to speed on what does this mean from a process, a design, a management perspective.
yeah, that's where the alignment work comes in. Like you really have to get people to understand what you're trying to achieve, who the users are and what they need and what their pain points are. And that's when you start to see some forward progression in collaborating on getting some of this work done. And it can be overwhelming at first. Look at all of what's there.
Okay, so let's talk about the corporate underpants story, the academic underpants, which may be even more unsightly.
When I first started one of the jobs that I was in for higher ed, I got in and there was a huge project already underway and it had a giant committee of people. It had already been going on for maybe a year. It had what seemed like a pretty straightforward scope. But then as you started to dig into the project, you realize it's not clear what the scope is and what the goals are and what are we doing. It was build these templates for program pages, right? Build program page templates. Yeah, that seems pretty straightforward from a web strategy standpoint. Okay, but why are we doing this? Is there a problem? Are users struggling to find something? Is there a business problem that we're trying? But that we didn't bubble that up. We're going to build these pages and we start doing it. And as I was going through it and doing the work, I realized we're not all talking about the same goals here, the same project. There's something missing. But I just kept going and I kept doing like the best practices of UX. Like, hey, let's do some research, talk to users, blah, 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 follow the blueprint of UX best practices, journey map, then start doing some IA. And in the end, the project did turn out really well. It was effective. It did a lot of good things. The problem is that not everyone agreed because not everyone agreed what it was even trying to do. From the marketing team's perspective, we achieved our goals. But because a lot of the stakeholders on the project were not aligned as to what the goals even were outside of we need these templates, there was conflict. Even afterwards, there was already confusion. Like, why did we do that? Why didn't we do this? And what happened to this section? Or I don't like how this turned out. But we didn't have agreed upon business goals to start to say, but we achieved the goals that we all set out to achieve. We didn't have
Okay, so
that.
so you come
Right?
in, there's this massive project underway. It's been going for a while. I think I would assume, okay, I just need to get up to speed on what they've already decided. They're clear decisions. There must have been some decisions that were made. That's even stupid to say, right?
Yeah.
But you came in and were like, were there
Yeah.
decisions?
There was a charter. There was a document that said, this is what we're trying, but it wasn't laid out as business goals, KPIs, users, which is like what we would like to see in an alignment and being done. But that was not how it was defined. Also, just to point out, if you even go into higher ed or government or any of these organizations say, we need to figure out business goals, do not use that word business goal. People, they don't want to see what they're doing as a business because then that implies like we're trying to make money and we're trying to extract from other people money and sell them something. And what we're trying to do is provide value to humans to better their lives. And so
I mean,
ideally you say like outcomes or what are just our goals as an organization is a better way of framing it. And It's just a
This
side
is
note, but yeah.
I am violent about goals. I basically say I won't do anything without clear goals, and I call them, in my process, business goals on
Mm,
purpose because in the world of tech and regular for-profit corporations, nobody can push back on the idea of needing business goals. And I basically say, use that word even though they're usage-based metrics, like how long
right,
does it take someone to make their first purchase? It's not nominally a business goal in the lingo of business school. But if I
right.
call it a usage metric, they don't think it's important enough for them to decide on it. But I
Yeah,
had exactly the same experience. So I went in to help a local nonprofit here that is related to the health of waterways. And the first thing I did, because I always do this, is I'm like, what are the business goals for the website? And they almost attacked me. They did attack me. I got pulled aside. I got told, this is not a business. This is not the way we think of, and so I backpedaled and I said, all right, okay, hold on. So tell me what you want people to do. How will you know the website is a success? We don't think
yes,
about the website as successful or not. I'm like, okay, backpedal again. I'm like, what do you want people to do? What's wrong with
right,
it now? Where it's not, is it that you want fewer phone calls? Obviously, you
right.
want more donations. How many more donations do you really want through the website? We can't even say that because anything's positive. And I was pulling my hair out because I'm like, I don't, if there's no goalposts, then you don't even know which direction you're supposed to run in, but
Right.
they're violently allergic. So
Yeah.
say more about that because I wish I had known you then because it would have saved me a lot of agita.
Yeah. I learned it the hard way too, because I was like, all right, what are our business goals? And they're like, we're not selling a widget. And I was like, oh, that's fair. And I started to learn to avoid that. And yeah, I think it's, as you said, just framing is okay, what do we want to achieve for the students or for the organization? What do we want to achieve? Do we need to get more applicants? Do we want to make it easier for them to do A, B, C, and D? Do we want to make it easier for us to manage this Wild West set of content? And that ended up being actually one of the goals. That was one of the goals, was to actually make it easier to manage the content, but that was never stated clearly in any document. It just, to me, seemed implied and obvious. But because we did not align on that with all the people who were involved and we didn't define all the people who were stakeholders, when we were done, people were like, why did you do this? Like this, I don't like this outcome.
Because
And
they did.
then you're backpedaling. You're like, oh, this actually is better. Yeah, but I didn't want that. I didn't think we needed that. No matter how successful a project is, if everyone in the organization does not feel it was successful, it wasn't in higher ed. It feels
You told me in
unsuccessful.
the beginning, like some people would think that more applications were important. Some other organizations might not think
Right.
that more and you
Right.
also said to me in the beginning, and I want you to say more about both of these things, that you found yourself having the same meeting over and over again with like dozens of people.
Yeah, I would go to one of the things they do in higher ed is as you're working on projects, you go talk to the different divisions, keep them updated, bring them into the fold. But we just were getting peppered with, hey, by the way, did you check in with this division? Oh, I didn't know they're a stakeholder. Make sure you go talk to them. And then you bring them all this work you're doing. And then they start questioning, why are you doing this? How did this come about? And you're answering over and over to each division and going through the same almost of discussion and explaining the process. And then you find yourself a year out from the project and you're still not moving forward because you
You're still
realize, oh,
having the same conversations just with
same
different things.
conversations, different people, new people come in. They're like, wait, what are we doing? Why are we doing it that way? Who's this for? I thought we were going to be doing this for this group, or I thought this was going to be the goal. And so you're constantly chasing your tail in some
And then
cases.
it's never, if you did actually make a decision, there's no like, how do you get, who would you get to sign off on? These are our top 4 goals for this redesign project, especially a year into it.
Right.
It's just so much easier to say that's not what we decided on. And that's something that I find in the alignment work all the time, which is you have to realize that it's much more risky for any stakeholder. The higher up, it's even more true for to say definitively, this is our goal. Because
Right.
the chance that you're wrong has huge political implications. And actually drawing any line in the sand costs political capital. So it is actually much saner not to say, yes, this is our goal. if you're an executive than it is to say, yes, this is our goal.
Right. Right.
And then the other thing is you were like, let's say you were meeting with like the geology department and the healthcare department. Okay, you could get to sanity with each one of them individually. But then if you have a meeting with both of them together, everything flies out the window.
And that happened a lot on this project. You thought, oh, I got this dean on board. They're really on board with this. I got this other dean on board with this. But then they get in the room and they're like, wait, I don't actually agree with your perspective. And now you're stuck in the middle. And it's like a game of Jenga. You're constantly like, wait, is this okay? Let's move this. Let's move that. And you're never getting it. And then eventually it tips over. And so I think this is why doing alignment at the very beginning of a project, clarifying who those stakeholders are, getting it done before it saves you so much time. It seems to the real sponsor of the project or whatever you might say, the executive director of the department or even the president might say, I don't think we have time to do that. Let's just get going. You save so much time if you do this. Take a long time, but you will save time and headache.
It's the slowing down to speed up, which is tricky to get people to do. So let's just draw a line around this project. So you came in after somebody else had kicked it off. Huge project to redesign some big content, ridiculous website for a university. A year later, you're still having one-on-one meetings where you're like having the very first meeting conversation with individual department heads, let's say.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Did it get done? How did you
Yes.
finish this project? And what
Yeah.
happened? Why was it painful? What happened?
Yeah. Yeah. The project got done. Eventually I won't define the exact person, but someone at the top level said, we just have to do this. Go finish it, publish it. And so we did. We said, all right, we're pulling off the Band-Aid. We're doing it. We know it. We know internally as a web team what has to be done to get this project out the door. And we don't have everyone in agreement as to this being the result, but we have to do it. Like enrollment was struggling. So we did it and enrollment started to pick up and it was, again, for all intents and purposes, like it was successful based off the metrics. It was successful, but there was frustration by the end of it. That some people, like, we lost some trust in the organization a little bit. Like, how do we trust you to do projects if you're not getting our input, or we didn't know what the goals were and now we don't agree with this?
And it probably made some of the interdepartmental politics even worse. You said Jenga, and this image came into my head. It's not just Jenga. It's Jenga where each block has invisible hidden magnets of different polarities in them. And if you stack them, they might have bizarre reactions. So you may stack a meeting together with geology and healthcare and not realize that each of them has a a polarized magnet in it from previous interactions where they don't like each other or they're angry at each other or somebody won some battle 2 years ago and that comes up in this meeting that has nothing to do with that. I can't tell you how many times I get calls to do projects where people are looking for personas, but really after 5 minutes, they're talking to me about, we need something to solve this problem where the VP of engineering and the VP of marketing will not speak to each other. So there's these invisible battles that you stumble across like
Right.
landmines.
Yeah. You get thrown in the middle of stuff that you did not know existed.
So after you launched, these numbers started climbing, thank heavens. And it
Yeah.
turns out that actually getting enrollments up is critical to the entire
Right.
org because that's where the money is. Hey, did you get angry emails from geology and healthcare or
Oh
whoever?
yeah. Yeah. That's funny that you mentioned that. We got like hate mail. This is the first time I worked anywhere where like I got emails from people like, you destroyed my section of the site. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that there's a new stakeholder who I never even knew was part of the work, was a stakeholder.
So
So
you
you got
caused
like
new
things,
politics.
yeah, new politics that got a little hairy at times. And again, it was fair because they did not know why we were doing the work and what the goals were. They were not aligned. They were not informed. There was not clarity as to like why this was done and who made it. The assumption was I made all these unilateral decisions too. And it wasn't. There was a committee, but again, there was not transparency and it was not started from the very beginning,
Right.
articulated from the very start.
Well, that's it for part one. You got to hear a lot about how weird things are in non-tech organizations. Stay tuned for the part two of this episode where Adam is going to tell us all about how he used early stage alignment to totally change everything for the next project that he did for the very same organization. I'll see you in part 2. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Corporate Underpants, and there's lots more to come. If you have any projects that you need my help on, if you're interested in coaching to become a senior product leader through understanding alignment in politics, or if you're interested in any of the classes or books that I'm developing, please visit my website, adlininc.com, and get in touch.